Can everyone see my screen? All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. This just this working group meeting. As we know, this is the meeting where we will be making decisions on the draft disadvantaged communities criteria. Wanted to point out that this will be a draft. We will be making final determination after a comment period of 120 days, but we will be voting on the draft criteria today for anyone who wants to keep that for their records. Again, just to keep things consistent, working group members, if you're not speaking, please be on mute. We encourage you to say your name beforehand just for transcript purposes. And when we actually do get to the part where we are voting, if you could be on screen, I think that would be helpful. If not, that's fine. If you can't be on screen, no worries. But if you can be on screen, we would appreciate it. Thank you. And I understand the irony since I'm not on screen, but I will try to put myself on screen when it comes time for the vote. So we can get to the roll call, and I will start based on who I see. Amy.
Good afternoon. Amy Klein.
Hi, Amy. Abby.
I'm here. Glad to be here.
And Chris.
Good afternoon.
Elizabeth.
Buenos días, Elizabeth.
Jill.
Hello, I'm here. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you said
That's
Joe.
okay. No, that's fine. And Jill. See you, Jill. We spoke earlier. Eddie.
Oh, working on that video, but I'm here. Sorry.
That's fine. Mary Beth.
Good afternoon, everyone.
And Neil.
Hi, good afternoon. This is Neil.
Rawa.
Good afternoon, I'm here.
And Sonal.
Hello, present.
Okay, and obviously we're joined today by Sarah Bernard, who is our admin and will be dealing and addressing any technical issues. So if anybody has any concerns or problems, please feel free to message her. We're also joined by Samir from NYSERDA and our illustrious consultants from Illum, Alex Dunn and Amanda Dwelly. Am I missing anybody? I think I've gotten everyone. So with that being said, let's get started. So this is going to be the agenda for today. We're going to review the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act legislation, or Article 75 of the Environmental Conservation Law. We'll go over what the voting rules and the process is going to be. We'll talk about the draft criteria and summarize it so we can make sure that we've hit all the points, discussing each element so that we'll be comfortable with everything, and if we need to outline any limitations or alternatives, and then we'll vote on the overall criteria, and after that we'll discuss any next steps that we need to go through. Does anybody have any questions before we move on? And Rawa, I see that you have to jump off at 3. We should be done by then. We should at least have the vote done, and if there's anything that we need to update you, we can definitely make sure that happens. I understand the sick child and vomiting during a climate justice working group meeting, so definitely very cognizant of that, and we'll try to make sure that we get this done so that it helps you out. Okay. So I'm sorry, I forget. Yes, I am doing the slide. So if we're looking at the slide, this discusses the Article 75 of the Environmental Conservation Law, which is the part of the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. So this sort of highlights what the Climate Justice Working Group is charged with within that legislation, that we will consult to establish the criteria to identify disadvantaged communities, and that the goal is for co-pollutant reduction, greenhouse gas emission reduction, regulatory impact statements, and obviously for the allocation of investments related to the Article 75. Does anybody have any questions? Okay. Chris, did you want to discuss this section?
Yep, sure. Thanks, Alana. So, and then as we're kind of, reviewing and thinking about Section 750117, as a reminder, this outlines the investment mandate and the benefits goal, that the state has. So essentially kind of outlining, the fact that the state shall invest or direct relevant energy efficiency or clean energy programmatic resources in a manner to achieve a goal for the communities that the Climate Justice Working Group is going to be determining to kind of meet the criteria for being disadvantaged to receive a goal of 40% of the overall benefits of those investments. As we've kind of discussed as a working group, the 40% goal shouldn't be seen as a ceiling, in that, we would expect that, as we're thinking about the totality of investments in clean energy and energy efficiency, programs that, while we will be kind of, working to ensure that disadvantaged communities, receive kind of the benefit or higher, the benefit of over 40% of those, I should say, receive the benefit. Excuse me for the tongue twister, but so essentially to make sure that those communities receive at least 40% of the benefits associated with clean energy and energy efficiency investments, that the remainder of the funding would still be kind of dedicated to benefiting the balance of the state that isn't determined to be a disadvantaged community. And then we've also kind of talked through the fact that the state is advancing the concept of establishing direct investments as the benefit metric that would be tracked towards the 35 and 40% goals, and that the state will also be seeking to measure, track, and report out on the broad range of co-benefits associated with clean energy investments in disadvantaged communities. Maybe I'll pause there. Does anyone want to revisit the conversation on
Chris, could you
benefits?
could you repeat that? Hi, could you repeat those last couple of sentences? I'm sorry about the I guess direction the state is going in terms of its figuring out the percentages.
Yep. So what and we've discussed this a few times, at a high level here as a working group. But the thinking is we would look to the direct investments that are going into projects located within disadvantaged communities as the benefit metric that we would track towards the investment mandate. And then in addition to tracking the investment goal, we would still seek to kind of measure and report out on the other co-benefits that would be tied to those investments. So measuring kind of economic development or health outcomes. Those sorts of co-benefits would be part of the reporting that the state would do on an annual basis.
Thanks for that, Chris. I just want to make sure I'm reflecting what I'm hearing, which, if this is correct, is going to make some of us very happy, I think. But so up until now, excuse me, a lot of the conversation has been either or, this kind of binary approach. Either we're going to track and monitor implementation success of CLCPA by tracking direct investments or the squishier. Well, we're going to look at this, but we're going to try to identify a benefits matrix and not track direct investments. That won't that wouldn't be the frame that the state would use. What I'm hearing, and I just want to make sure I'm reflecting it correctly, what I'm hearing is that the state will in fact track direct investments to see if in fact the 35 to 40% mandate is being met. But in addition to tracking direct investments, the state is also going to try to capture the, as you mentioned, the co-benefits, not just, yeah, we're investing X amount of $1 billion in this piece of infrastructure. That's how we account our progress to the 35 to 40%. By the way, that'll be our accountability system. But by the way, in addition to this being the 35% commitment, these are all the co-benefits associated from that investment, not for accounting purposes, but just to capture all the ways that these investments are being beneficial to New Yorkers. So we've moved from direct investments versus just benefits. So yeah, we're going to track direct investments. By the way, we're also going to capture co-benefits. Is that latter where you all are landing?
Yeah, so it'll be both, right? So it'll be tracking the investments, but we also know the investments don't tell the full story when it comes to other benefits, right? So it'll be both. That's the plan.
Thank you, Chris. On behalf of at least NEJA, I want to congratulate and acknowledge that the state is heading in this direction. This is not only where we have been urging from the beginning of the convening of the Climate Justice Working Group that the state go in this direction. It was actually the original language of the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. The original intent was to measure direct investments. So the fact that the state is looking to honor that plus capture all the other co-benefits is a really welcome bit of news and not only much appreciated, but I think it really honors the spirit that the environmental justice and climate justice movements worked together to get this law passed a few years ago. So kudos to DEC and NYSERDA. Really happy to hear this. Thank you.
And Eddie, the other thing I'll mention is, while the focus of the meeting today is the disadvantaged communities draft criteria, we do and what we want to kind of have a broader conversation with the full Climate Justice Working Group on kind of what that benefits framework looks like, from an operational perspective. So I think we'll want to find some additional time for this group to connect to work through that. But just sharing kind of where things stand today.
And Rawa, you had a question?
I did. Thank you, Alana. I too want to applaud NYSERDA and the DEC on really giving us some firm ways of addressing this issue, because before I think it was just too difficult to even to wrap our heads around it, and this seems very, very clear. And then Chris, my question to you is, so for the co-benefits and how they're being tracked, will the state agencies be using the 44 or 45 criteria points that we came up with in the Climate Justice Working Group to measure co-benefits?
Yeah, Rawa. So I think there's more work that needs to be done to flesh out kind of what the co-benefits, that would be measured and tracked would look like. I don't really have much more to share other than, we would seek to get some additional input and have some additional conversations about, what benefit metrics, what co-benefit metrics, should be tracked. And I think a good place to start would be to look at, what the group had identified in terms of, initial kind of criteria. But then we need to kind of layer in, to the conversation, what are the available methods to measure and track, those co-benefits. And so that will that will require some additional work. And part of what, my reference to, having another follow-up conversation with the working group members, work through what that looks like.
Thank you.
Did anybody else have anything that they wanted to add before we move forward?
I just want to say that this is really great news. Thank you, Chris. Like this is rock star stuff. Like this is New York State saying, this is how we're going to roll. I'm excited. It's great. Thank you.
Ahead. All right, so on this slide, obviously we see the disadvantaged communities description, communities that bear a disproportionate burden from negative health effects, environmental pollution, etc., and what is in ECL Article 75, Section 01111C, that this is what we've been using moving forward, and what we've used in order to base a lot of the criteria and data on. That disadvantaged communities are identified based on geographic, public health data, environmental hazards, and socioeconomic criteria, and that there also are additional areas that we can use, for example, areas that are burdened by cumulative environmental pollution and hazards, areas with high concentrations of people who are low income or high unemployment, high rent burden, low levels of home ownership, etc. Folks who have historically experienced discrimination on the basis of race or ethnicity, and then areas that are vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, such as flooding, storm surges, and urban heat island effects. Does anybody have any questions with regards to the description, or can we move forward? All right, moving forward. And so what we're looking to vote on for the draft criteria, this is also in the Environmental Conservation Law, CLCPA, that before we finalize the vote on the criteria for disadvantaged communities, we need to identify them based on the section. And we're going to, obviously, DEC, before the public comment period begins, we will publish the draft criteria, and we will publish a list of those communities so we can make that information available on our website and on the climate.ny.gov website following the vote. And we will hold at least 6 regional public hearings, or it will probably begin with some public information sessions just to make sure that everybody has all the information that they need to hear from us before we start these public hearings. But there'll be at least 3 meetings upstate, 3 downstate, based on what the open meetings law, whether or not the suspension of in-person meetings is still in place. We will most likely try to have a hybrid where we're having both virtual and in-person meetings if in-person meetings are still taking place. And once again, there will be a comment period of 120 days that will begin from the date we post this information on the website. Following the vote, it's probably going to take a little while to make sure that we get that information in a suitable format that's digestible for and accessible for the entire public. But we are definitely looking to have that posted to the website so we can begin the public comment process as soon as possible. And we're definitely going to make sure that there are meaningful opportunities for everyone to comment from all segments of the population that are going to be impacted by the criteria. So we will make it available for public comment via email, and also if people want to send in their comments, snail mail or regular mail, we can do that as well. But we definitely want to make sure that there are opportunities for everyone to comment on the criteria, on the lists, and on the draft. Does anybody have any questions or concerns?
I have a question, Alana. This is Rawa.
Sure. Hi, Rawa.
Hi. So these 6 regional meetings are just for the work of the Climate Justice Working Group, not the whole open plan. Okay.
No,
And
no,
then-
no. Those are
Yeah.
3. Those are 6 other meetings.
That's cool. I can just tell you a little bit. It would be really great to get a list of what those communities are going to be specifically as soon as possible. And one thing that I've heard so far is that they may not be enough meetings, but I'm just throwing it out there as, the messenger, so don't kill me.
Oh, no, that's fine.
Yeah.
It's
Okay.
a
So
minimum of 6 meetings. We could always have more.
okay, great. And then, yeah, so my question is, when do you think you'll know exactly where those 3 communities, upstate and 3 downstate, are going to be?
We should know relatively soon. We are meeting with our folks in the Office of Communication Services to determine exactly where the locations are, areas that, and we are obviously having conversations to see what the format needs to be, whether it needs to be completely virtual, whether we'll be able to have a hybrid, and finding a location that is suitable, and also making sure that we have the proper technology to create the hybrid. So we definitely will have a follow-up with everybody to discuss the next steps on what that's going to look like. But 6 is just the minimum. So if we have the 3 upstate and it looks like we haven't had enough people, or we haven't been able to get far enough for people to be able to participate, we can definitely hold additional meetings when needed. It's a 120 day comment period, so we can definitely, I'm not saying that we should hold 12, but we could conceivably hold 12 meetings within that period. Are there any other questions? I'm trying not to say that we are going to hold 12, but we could actually hold it if we need 1 or 2 additional meetings. That's definitely fine.
This is Abby. Hi. Maybe it's, so I have a concern about the maps. I've been looking at the maps and I don't know when the right time to raise that concern is.
I believe we're going to be getting to that.
Okay.
So, voting process. Was that you, Alex?
Hey.
Were you going to be doing that?
Hey, Alana, this is Chris. Sorry to interrupt, but could I just add another piece of context on the investments piece? So
Certainly.
a colleague flagged this for me. One of the things that we are working through is, this distinction between a place-based investment, so investments in projects that are located within disadvantaged communities or otherwise going to support, community-led activities like, building capacity, ultimately looking at community ownership models versus investment in like statewide or systems-wide investments. So, things that can't be directly tied back to localities. So that is the one, I guess, caveat with respect to like the investments that we would track and count towards the 40% goal. And so, as we set up the next conversation with the working group on, what the benefits framework could look like, we can do a deeper dive into those specific, kind of distinctions, like what sorts of programs fall under which category and that sort of thing.
Chris, can you
So I just wanted to be clear for everyone. Yep.
Can you repeat the comment you just made?
Right. So so there's a distinction between the investments that we could track, that are going directly into a community, right? So if we're thinking about, systems-based or, more statewide investments, we can't track those directly into a community. So we wouldn't include those sorts of investments. And I'm thinking like, this would be like marketing activities, implementation activities, like the value of RECs when we're talking about like large scale renewables, because those sorts of investments aren't going directly, into communities. But we would include, all of the other, investments that are place-based. So I think we probably do need a deeper dive into kind of what that looks like. But, just wanted to clarify, for folks that didn't have that context.
Chris, one quick just caveat. I know we need to figure those out. But I think I know the answer, but let me just kind of tease this out. Let's say, we're close to the end of the year. We're, looking back at investments over the past year. If the state of New York is at, say, I don't know, 34%, right, of its direct investments in our communities. So let's say it's falling short a hair or whatever, right? Um, you're not, I don't think that this is what we're saying, but we're not saying looking at regional infrastructure investments, if there are co-benefits that accrue to EJ communities, that's not going to be the thumb on the scale that's going to drive the 35% into compliance, right? Like in other words, like we'll be identifying the regional infrastructure projects and their co-benefits, but will that accounting, if lead to the state concluding that, hey, there are these co-benefits, even though the investment is not directly in an EJ community, therefore we can claim that we reached our 35% and exceeded it.
Yeah, Eddie, thanks for that question. So that's exactly why we wouldn't include those sorts of investments, in the calculation. And so, the calculation of the 35-40% towards the investment benefit mandate would be based on those place-based investments and programs, projects happening within communities. So
Gotcha,
no, co-benefits will not tip the scale.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yep. And so we're preparing a deeper dive into, what this looks like operationally, so that way we can kind of discuss that as a group. Anyway, sorry for the departure.
So in this section, we just wanted to go through, before actually outlining the proposal, what the process could be today to discuss really each element of the draft criteria before getting to an overall vote. So in 2 slides, we'll kind of show a way to possibly break down the criteria into separate elements to review and discuss each of them, giving you a chance to kind of raise questions, limitations, notes, comments on each of them. And if there's time, maybe do a temperature check for each element. Our goal would be to get through all of this by 2:30, actually, including going through about 5 or 6 discrete elements, as well as the maps. And then we're assuming that some of the language that we've drafted for today's discussion might need to be edited or refined over the course of the discussion. So we're hoping to schedule in about a 10-minute break around 2:30 for DEC staff and consultants to revise that language before going to a vote. And then, so some of this language in the PowerPoint might change, but the DEC can post the final PowerPoint. Any questions or ideas here? Okay. Alana, do you want to talk through the voting rules on the next slide?
Sure. Do you think I should take this off of slideshow so we can see more of the live editing? Because I feel like we can't see it.
I think we're good for now. Let's see.
Okay.
To get there.
Okay, in order for us to officially make this a vote, we need to have a quorum of the Climate Justice Working Group present, which we currently have right now. So it would need to be a minimum of 7 out of the 13 members. All of the members of the working group, including the 4 agency members, do have an equal vote in the process. And we will do a roll call vote, and we're going to start with the Climate Justice Working Group members and end with the agency members. Does anyone, and the goal is to make sure that we have that vote before, to make sure everybody's present. We're going to try to start that around 2:30, so Donathan can jump on, and we want to try to get that, or 240. We want to try to get that done so we don't lose RAWA and Sonal. Does anybody have any questions? Okay.
All right, so this dense slide contains the key elements of the disadvantage criteria we've been discussing, written in kind of technical language, but still a summary of the very deep and much longer, methods and approaches and lists we've been discussing that we'll get through. So our thought was to go through each of these. This is a way to break down on the left the geographic definition for which census tracts could be identified in the draft list of disadvantaged communities, and then discuss two elements related to the individual criteria, and then possibly discuss the annual evaluation and review process. So we'll go through each of these and have the opportunity to tweak this language as we go. Number 1 is about the indicator list. Number 2 is about scoring census tracts relative to each other and what that process looks like. And number 3 is once you have a score, which census tracts should be included as geographic disadvantaged communities. And then on the right, number 4 is about just the decision, a yes/no decision to include low-income households located anywhere in the state for the purpose of investing or directing clean energy programs, projects, or investments. So again, that would only be applicable to investment purposes. And number 5 is if there is agreement or a vote or interest in including those households, how exactly will you define them? And number 6 isn't necessarily something that needs to be voted on, but just a chance to kind of review and affirm the annual evaluation and review process that's mentioned in the statute. And we'll try to go through the maps probably around number 2. All right. Just that same, note, I just talked through that these statements described here are really intended to summarize the draft methods that will be used to identify draft disadvantaged communities to facilitate discussion and voting today. The draft methodology, draft list of census tracts and maps would then be published as part of the public input process. Okay. So, before I get started, for time's sake, we were thinking we'd try to kind of go quickly through review of some of these elements. But given that, we were thinking of, stopping for discussion at the end of each of these 5 or 6 sections, but definitely speak up or get our attention in the chat if at any time you want to stop and discuss these.
Oh, Amanda, only because I'm going to have to go pick up my kids in just a couple of minutes and won't really be able to participate during that time. If I could just quickly voice the concern that I have, and I know the timing's not quite right, so I apologize for that.
Sure.
So when I did go and look at these kind of, not final maps, but draft final maps, there were a couple of census tracts that jumped out at me as like, how on earth did we miss those in our definition? And based on the numbers I'm looking at, my guess is that maybe environmental burdens and climate risks are kind of overly weighted relative to population characteristics and health vulnerabilities. Of course, this is going out for public review, and I am so sure that we are going to get public pushback on some of this, so that does provide the opportunity to make changes later, which is good, but I don't know if it makes sense to try to address some of that, proactively.
I would love to. Alex does have the maps ready to go. So let's definitely look at those communities and try to understand together why those weren't designated. I think it's always good to do that. With respect to weighting, Each side of these things is actually equal weight because these two things are multiplied. So there might be weights within things, but by virtue of multiplying the two sides of things here, environmental burdens and climate change risks and population characteristics and health vulnerabilities, they actually do have equal weight. So what happens is you either need to be kind of moderate to high on each of them, or kind of high on one and middle range in the other one. So it definitely happens that you could be, high on population characteristics and health and low on environmental burdens and climate risks and not included.
Yeah, and just looking at the maps and knowing these communities, kind of that ground truthing exercise part of it, it just doesn't feel right on some of them. So again, I hate to be that person who's like, at this point in the process, throwing a wrench in it in any way. But I do have concerns when I see some of the neighborhoods that are left out.
Let's pull up the maps.
I'm ready to go. Alana, if you give me control, I can go through these things.
Hold on, I got to expand this so I can actually see you. There you go.
Awesome. As we go through this, we can also talk through the options for what to do today based on that. Okay, I've got Rochester all ready. Which ones were you thinking?
Okay, so when you go, you see that chunk in the middle there, that are, yes, right, those ones. Those are the ones. And especially the one next to that, although that one's bad too. But yeah, these are all like in terms of population health vulnerability in the 90th percentile. And I don't know. It seems like there must be something in our environmental and climate, like what differentiates that between some of these rural much more rural tracks. If you go down south a little bit, like
here.
Yeah, and over a little bit. Yep, in there. I mean, just the air would be cleaner there, I would say, without a doubt, so I don't know what gets that such, I mean, there are, industrial things, but spread out and far between. And
yeah, well, just like last week when we were talking about, parts of Sunset Park too, that this is what's happening, and what we had tinkered with like before was, okay, do we have this multiplication thing and then we add on like this extra bit for the kind of the more population and vulnerability to try to add to it, and we couldn't really get there. The legislation is pretty clear as far as including both, and so the way that we have done it is to make that happen, and this is a true concern. And I will tell you that Amanda and I tried a lot of different permutations to try to like elevate these things up. So that concern is real, and I think it's appropriate to raise because this is clearly something that should be a DAC in a view of kind of that visceral nature, as you're saying, the ground truthing. So to me, what this says is, how do we raise this concern? And then also, how do you feel whether this is going to make you not vote for it, or is this like, we need to work on this? Like, I kind of want to get your temperature on that.
Whew.
That was a big question.
Because, like, trust me, I want to vote for this and I want to get on.
I mean, no worries, okay? Like, this is the process. This is the life of making this stuff.
But I mean, well, we are going to get public pushback on this because it would not be right that community is left out. And then if we can change it later, then okay, before it like goes into effect for real. So anyway, I do have to run, pick up my kids. I'm going to drive today instead of walking like I normally do. It's not so I can get back faster. But thank you for hearing my concerns.
Okay, Abby, so just so you know, we're going to continue along, but when you come back, we need to talk about this.
And I'm listening in.
Okay, thanks.
Hey,
And
it's
I'm
Eddie.
gonna, oh, sorry, go ahead, Eddie.
Oh, a quick question. Yeah, and hopefully Abby will be hearing and we'll hopefully get some additional feedback. What I'm wondering is, maybe she said it, and I'm sorry if I missed it, but uh, as what is it about these areas that Abby is seeing should have been captured by the ground truthing, and was it right? Because what we like, I think what we discovered last week when Sunset Park, when Elizabeth was mentioning what was missing there, what was I think we were able to pretty quickly determine that the kinds of environmental and climate burdens that the law was intended to capture didn't extend to those communities. So I'm wondering if we know what it is about these particular census tracts that Abby thinks this picture is missing, because I think that part of the problem that we're having is if the intention, if what we were hoping was that this law would cover every person of color in New York State, it never was going to do that. It was never intended to do that, right? This was intended specifically to get at the environmental and climate vulnerabilities of these communities. So I'm just wondering, I don't know if Abby shared, or if she still can share, what is it about these communities that environmentally speaking should have been characterized as DAX or not?
I don't know if Abby can share, but I will say this, like they are very low income, a high BIPOC population, but they're also very low on the environmental burden side. And so it is a lot like Sunset Park and those great, those few tracks that we couldn't get in no matter what we did. And that's the same thing here. And if you look right up,
Wait, Alex, you didn't just say that Sunset Park is low on the environmental burdens, did you?
at the ones that we have measured and able to do.
Because here's the thing, Alex, if you live 2 miles away from a highway, you are susceptible to asthma and upper respiratory disease. And we are literally 2 avenues away from the Gowanus Expressway with like something like some extraordinary number of cars and trucks going through there every day. So I don't, so what is counting as environmental remediation? The cemetery? I'm not trying to be difficult, but
no, it's okay.
But to say publicly that Sunset Park, that there are swaths of Sunset Park that are not environmentally burdened is just not true. And we've got, I'm in my office right now and I'm looking directly across to the MTA's bus depot. And I'm literally surrounded by, like I'm right here, I'm looking out the window. So I think that to make the distinction between the industrial area, which is clearly heavy, and then the residential area, which literally is exposed to all the contamination because it's airborne. I just want to make sure that on the record, we're being real clear that this is entirely an EJ community. And then around 8th Avenue, 7th Avenue, and 6th Avenue, we have industrial sectors that may not appear on the map because they're sweatshops, but we can see. I can go there right now and see all the trucks lined up. I can see that it's industry where people don't have access to windows, and that it's low-income people, definitely low-income people with health disparities that work in those spaces, and they're not on the map. So I just want to say that because
it's good that you say that, Elizabeth.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. And so correct me because lots of words and words are hard, but in this case what I'm trying to say is that given the data that we have, and we will go through all the indicators because we have a lot, but I think you're right, there's some things that are missing, and we can't get those, like just what you said with the sweatshops, which I think is what's happening in Sunset Park, is like those are invisible to the data we have. So what we need to do is make a list of things that we need to look at more in depth so that we can start adding to it and making the data better, because we have a lot of really good air pollution data in here. So clearly something's missing. And the same thing I think is happening in Rochester.
Can I just jump in quick? Because you're right, Alex and Elizabeth and Abby. Language, we have to be careful what we're saying and how we're saying it, right? So correct me if I'm wrong. The census tracts, whether it's in Sunset Park or Rochester, that Elizabeth and Abby are saying, look, these are part of an EJ community. Like it doesn't make sense that they wouldn't be part of this. That's accurate. I believe the misstep or the miscommunication isn't that the DAC, what we're trying to get at here is not a definition of EJ communities. That's not what we're working on. We're working on identifying disadvantaged communities that would be prioritized for the 35 to 40% investment. But just because a community doesn't make that cut doesn't mean they're not an EJ community. So like I think we need to make that distinction, right? That these are census tracts that are in the same community, right? So you can't say something's an EJ community and a census tract within it is somehow airlifted out of the consideration. But so we should not be calling these maps EJ community maps. We should find a maybe not too wordy, but a more accurate description of what this is that we're landing on. Or something.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that, Eddie, because like this is hard, right? And one of the things I think that we've been struggling with is trying to get this to fit both the ground truth data and the feeling that you all have, plus, with the data we have, plus all the other things that the legislation is requiring. And so this is where it lands at this point. I think less so, if you kind of look here just to kind of compare and contrast, because that's, I think, the best way for us to be able to go through this, is to look, okay, well, you have a very high population and health vulnerability percentile, but you have a very low environmental burden one. And if you go right above it, you can see that environmental burden at 15%, still low, does qualify for a DAC. But at 6% it does not. And so there is clearly a difference between air quality or what all the other things that we have in the environmental burden and climate percentile here that are holding this one back from being designated a DAC. And I can go to Sunset Park if you'd like, and I think we can look at the same thing, though I think pretty clearly, to me, I feel like one of the things that might be different here is that there's either environmental burdens that are missing in this case, but it could be that it's just the fact that they're further away from something that is bad, but they're still highly vulnerable from a population and health way. They just aren't meeting the criteria to be designated a DAC.
I think this is coming up against that analysis we did showing that if we really just look at the population and health vulnerability side, we could get a lot closer to ground truthing. We did that analysis a while ago that said we could maybe get 80% of these ground truth areas, and the maps kind of did look a little bit better to people when we only included population characteristics and health vulnerabilities. But layering on environmental burdens and climate change risks, just the sheer number of them, and sometimes they point in different directions, layering that on to match the legislation meant that the identified community shifted a little bit further from the ground truth areas. And that's something that, we kind of continued with that to meet the legislation. I mean, that could be revisited to say maybe, I don't know, the extreme would be really we're only looking at, population and health, or we do something that we weight them less rather than equally.
And let's go through the different indicator lists that we have.
And can I just point out something really quickly? Hi. Just so everybody's aware, just from a sort of a legal perspective, we're approving this for, basically kind of for the release of public comments. We can still make comment, we can still make updates, we can, if there's additional information or additional public input that's, found before we finalize the criteria, we can do that. So nothing is kind of carved in stone. And even after we finalize this in, spring of 2022, that's still not final. There's still other updates and ways that we'll change it, if we find additional data. So I know that, we're afraid of leaving anybody out, and that there are still going to be ways that we can assist environmental justice communities and provide support for environmental justice communities that might not be listed as DACs. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody knew that. Did you need me to share my screen again, Alex, or?
Yeah, I think it's time
Okay.
for us to go through the indicators, kind of go through
I think you have to pass me the ball.
Okay, how do I do that? See.
So just click on it and then drag it up to my name or down to my name, wherever I'm located.
Go. Okay.
All right.
Okay, and if needed, I know we have limited time. We do have the data on those Rochester census tracts if we want to look at that at some point, but I will just go through the indicator list here. So slide 17. Okay, I think we've already kind of looked at the framework, but on the environmental burdens and climate change risks side, we group things into 3 factors. One is potential pollution exposures with 4 things that really measure air quality. So vehicle traffic density in general, which should be higher, with more roads and more traffic. Then diesel truck and bus traffic specifically. PM 2.5, that's a modeled value. Benzene concentration, that's a modeled value. And wastewater discharge from EJ screen. And then the DC helped identify numerous land uses and facilities that what we're saying are associated with historical discrimination or disinvestment. They may or may not have associated negative public health effects. And this is certainly not the whole list of environmental burdens that exist, but rather with help from the DC and DOH discussions here, what was kind of prioritized and what there was data on. So remediation sites, regulated management plan sites from EJ screen, which are potential chemical hazards, major oil storage facilities, which includes airports, power generation facilities, active landfills, municipal waste combustors, scrap metal processors, industrial manufacturing and mining land use, and housing vacancy rates. And then in terms of potential climate risks, which are kind of grouped here to group things that are characteristics of places together. That's why we kind of group these together. Extreme heat projections in 2050, flooding in coastal and tidally influenced areas, flooding in inland or riverine areas, low vegetative cover to capture urban heat island vulnerability, agricultural land use to also capture vulnerability to extreme heat, and driving time to hospitals or urgent critical care facilities, which might be relevant in a climate emergency. And just going ahead a little bit in terms of how these were weighted. So basically, there's a factor score that's the average of the things listed in each factor, and then the overall score for environmental burdens and climate change risks is kind of a weighted average of those factors. So just to kind of go from the bottom up here, so this tract would get 1 score for potential pollution exposures, capturing all those things equally. It would get another score for land use and facilities associated with historical discrimination or disinvestment, weighting each of the things in that list equally, and a potential climate change risk score, weighting each of the things in that 3rd column equally. And then to get the overall score for this component, environmental burdens and climate change risks, since the first 2 items are really related to environmental exposures and burdens and environmental justice concerns, those were actually given equal weight together as potential climate change risks to kind of balance out the legislation and consider both the environmental component and the climate change component. So any questions on the indicators here, or notes about limitations? And then what I think, we're seeing in Rochester, in those communities, several of the things in that middle category, it's really mostly that middle category. Burdens were measured based on distance in some cases and the presence of facilities. So those communities aren't showing up as near landfills, major oil storage facilities, municipal waste, power generation, remediation, scrap metal processing. And we're somewhat low on diesel traffic as well. So, the scoring is capturing, other factors like housing vacancy rates. Those communities do show up as close to a regulated management plan site.
Hey, Amanda?
Go ahead.
Are we not, should we be including extreme wind? There've been a few tornadoes in Brooklyn, and I was just wondering, is that now considered a potential climate change risk?
I'm not sure where that fell on the considered indicators list and the ability to capture that effectively. We did have that long list of all the things that were considered and couldn't be included, and there might have been storms, hurricanes, and winter weather there. And I don't have the details in front of me on why exactly that wasn't included.
We can also make note, I think one of the things that clearly need to make clear is that this is the first starting point, and that we need to kind of continue to improve it with the data re-ups and also the comparison of how the investments are going, all that. So one of the things.
Oh,
sorry, go ahead. No,
I was just going to say that extreme wind is a risk within itself, but extreme wind in proximity to a significant maritime industrial area is something else. So so I just wanted to flag that.
Yeah, well, let's make note of these, and I think that this is one of those, like, in the subsequent years we need to figure out how can we capture this, and also how can we capture frankly the shift in how these things are happening because of climate change at this point. So yeah, let's make note.
Alex, a quick question to piggyback on what Elizabeth was just flagging. Are we, did I understand you correctly? If so, I think that makes a lot of sense. But are we keeping track of things that we are already identifying that there may not be good data, or like the kinds of things that we know are climate change impacts, but the data sets may not be currently either existing or collected or analyzed? Are we keeping track of that so that we can keep informing this process as it moves forward? I mean, it's not, again, maybe these are things that then get added, tweaked, developed even by state agencies in advance of the next go round of this a year from now. But I just want to make sure that there is this tracking of impacts or vulnerabilities that currently may not be collectible or analyzable, but we should be kind of urging our state partners to figure out how to collect and introduce this data as these efforts move forward over the years.
Yeah, we do have a list, and as far as the indicators specifically, that has been running kind of from a year ago, and I think we've all kind of forgotten that whole crazy process of the 200 indicators, but we have that list, and I think wind is on there, but there's also the more detailed racial and ethnic data collection processes that don't exist right now. That's something there also. So we do have a list.
And I mean, I think we really do expect that in public comments, there'll be hundreds, if not 500 comments about additional indicators to consider. So, I mean, personally, just, looking at the type of comments California received, a lot of them were about additional indicators and why. So I would imagine personally after public comments, there'd be a lot of discussion that needs to happen on other indicators. And I think another challenge here we've discussed is when you add additional indicators that might be relevant, in some areas, it might water down things overall. So I think what we're seeing in Rochester is by having, active landfills, municipal waste combustors, scrap metal processors, industrial manufacturing, mining, all kind of entered separately to recognize those as separate threats. When those index as low or not close at all, it's actually resulting in like a low burden score. So this balance of including indicators that are most important, because when things have similar weight, it really can affect the overall score. It's definitely a challenge.
I want to keep us moving because I want us to go through and discuss all of these and go through kind of these are the limitations. This is what we're seeing and issues we have, so that we can get either to a vote or to not a vote, but been through.
Great. So in terms of population characteristics and health vulnerabilities, there's two factors that cover income, race, and ethnicity, and we kind of split those out so that they could each have equal weights to each other, and then together income, education, employment, race, and ethnicity have equal weights as the other two factors. So let's see, within this first factor, there's two income measures representing moderate income, less than 80% of AMI, and high poverty areas, less than 100% of the federal poverty line, to recognize a lot of different experiences of people living in poverty or with lower incomes, percent with a bachelor's degree, unemployment, single parent households. And the race, ethnicity, and language factor, again, somewhat limited by where there's adequate census data and the types of distinctions the census makes, and also recognizing the census doesn't even capture undocumented residents here. So the main things we could include are percent Latino or Hispanic, percent Black or African American, Asian, Native American or Indigenous, limited English proficiency, and then we did include the historical redlining score here. And then within each of these factors, to give even more weight to income, racial and ethnic groups that have experienced higher discrimination, we did weight both income metrics double in the income factor, and we weighted Latino and percent Black double in the race, ethnicity, and language factors. On the health side, the DOH helped tremendously in getting some really fine-grained data that wasn't available before this to get some of the health outcomes they could, but on the health side, we have discussed limitations around kind of what's recorded and what's available at the census tract level. So not being able to have COVID case rates or hospitalization or deaths. We also talked about not being able to have heat-related illness or hospitalization at this point, but something to note for the future. So we have asthma, COPD, heart attack hospitalization, premature deaths, and low birth weight births from public health data. And then from the census, the percent of the tract without health insurance with disabilities or adults over age 65. And then finally, to kind of represent housing conditions and energy costs and conditions, vulnerability to energy and climate change risks, looking at renter occupied homes, housing cost burden, really based on rental costs, energy cost burden, so energy costs as a percentage of income, manufactured and mobile homes, homes built before 1960 as an approximation for lead paint risk, recognizing that there wasn't granular data on lead paint itself, and percent of homes without internet.
Amanda, I'm surprised not to see diabetes in there. We saw what happens both in the Gulf South and in Puerto Rico, when there were these massive hurricanes, and what happened to people who didn't have access to the food that they needed, and to insulin, and those were mostly people of color. I'm just surprised that it's not in there.
Yeah, that's a great question. In the appendix of this deck and prior decks, we have that detail on the health indicators that had to be excluded and why. And I'm just reading from that slide. I think we had a meeting, about this at some point, but the DOH said that it's hard to capture in DOH data sets that mainly contain emergency department visits and hospitalization. So not necessarily people maintaining their, maintaining and taking care of their disease. With the idea that clinic and pharmacy data might better capture the disease, but the DOH doesn't have that. And there's also some discussion that diabetes may have a weaker environmental component, but I think the larger issue there was, the limitation in what you can actually reflect from ED visits and hospitalization. And then the DOH did note that diabetes correlates with premature deaths, sociodemographic correlates, as you noted, in health insurance. So that's kind of what we thought there, noting that it might be nice to include, but some data limitations.
That doesn't make sense to me, I have to say. I mean, you could make that correlation with asthma or COPD or any of those things. And I'm shocked to hear that Department of Health would say that they can't access diabetes data, or that they wouldn't have that accessible from ED visits. I mean, that just blows my mind. I mean, diabetes is related to so many comorbidities, and is directly related to disadvantaged communities and the lack of access to quality food. And I mean, that just doesn't make any sense to me. I'm sorry.
Hi, this is Neil.
Really,
I don't
sorry.
think there's an argument with that, what you said, Amy. I think we think that there's more bias in terms of the completeness of the data that we're getting in ED data and hospitalization data than for some of the indicators, other indicators.
I guess I still don't understand that, Neil. I mean, if this is looking at health vulnerabilities and population characteristics and health vulnerabilities, diabetes should be included. And I can't understand why the data wouldn't be available to speak
Again,
to those issues.
It's not a data availability per se. It's more the fact that we think more people would be having the diabetes managed in their primary care settings. We think that there's more of an undercounting in diabetes in the ED and hospitalization data compared to some of these other health outcomes, recognizing that, yes, asthma is also in some cases treated in the primary care setting. That said, we'll keep it, on the radar for future consideration and, think through it.
But we know that the more vulnerable populations use EDs to treat things like diabetes much more readily than they do their primary care docs. So I hate to just keep arguing it, and so I'll let somebody else speak. I'm just baffled.
I mean, it's a good point and actually a really important one. So I want to, Rob, I see you on Stack. I just want to say one thing and then cede to you. So I think we need to make note of it, and B, one of the things that, because there were many indicators, I think diabetes is a huge one, where we didn't have the data in the way that we wanted it. And so part of the reason why we took out race and ethnicity from these other buckets was to address the fact, and income was to actually make those count more, because there's so many kind of correlates in this case that those two buckets, the income, education, and employment, and the race, ethnicity, and language buckets, actually hold a lot more sway within this larger group of indicators. And that's because it's really good data that we can then use to try to model around some of the data inefficiencies or insufficiencies that we have. So that was part of it. And again, with the it's not perfect, I think we need to make a very strong note of trying to get this data in the future in a way that we can use it. Rawa?
We're just gonna have to continue beating this dead horse for a little bit longer. So I really just want to echo that diabetes, in particular, in really poor white communities, but in particular in communities of color, whether they are poor or even more affluent, is directly linked to the legacy of slavery and inequality. And the amount of people that die from it in our communities is pretty severe. And so I guess, I mean, I don't know if it's possible. I just really feel it's such a huge indicator in my community, for example, as someone who used to directly work with people affected with diabetes. Give me 1 second.
Yeah, and we've
So maybe
seen, and we see what happened. We saw what happened in the Gulf South, and we saw what happened to people who are diabetic in Puerto Rico. I just don't think that it's different from asthma in that respect, and it is part of the legacy of systemic racism. So I was actually really stunned. I thought it was a mistake that it wasn't in there, and to be put off just blows my mind. I'm not gonna lie. So I just and the assumption, also the assumption that people with diabetes have access to all of these other health management things is wrong. Is just wrong, and that's just the Department of Health lacking in its collection of data. And just because they're lacking, it feels like this process is harmed by agencies that are lacking in their data collection. I say as a diabetic who's eating right now.
Rawa, I think what you need to say, you say it out loud because it's really important what you're about to say or what you said in the chat.
Thank you. And I'm sorry about my little dog. Yeah, I think that the problem that we are having isn't like that we're not all clear that this is an important measure or criteria, but that the data inefficiency is the problem. So I guess I'm arguing for go ahead and keep it in as a criteria point, and then I think it will force the issue of agencies needing to actually do better data gathering, and when the data catches up to it, that it will be part of this ongoing iterative process that we've laid out.
Yeah, I'm cool with that, but I think we should all put, like, this was a really important one, and we all are there, I think. So we got to figure it out. I love Eddie's comment that the working group also wants to add indicators in the public comment process. It's pretty funny, Eddie.
I have my
okay,
moments.
You do. So let's continue on, but I think that these are the things that we're going to make note of as we continue on, so that they're in the public record that we want to be thinking about these. To that end, Amanda, can you add comments into this, and hopefully they'll kind of show up?
Live, we might need to go out of screen of presentation mode, but I mean, this is important to discuss at what, are we saying we need to add diabetes before things go to public comment, or that it would be on a list?
I don't know how folks feel. I think that if there is a very real and constant ongoing tension with some data sets not being where we need them to be, in order for it to be for all of us to feel confident that it's capturing what we want, I think that's not a small thing. In fact, I think it's an important thing for us to. I was kind of that was a half joke, Alex, earlier. I think it's important for the public to understand and for us to make public when we put these out on the street that in fact, there are going to be data points that all of us would like to see, that we're just not at a mature enough place to collect and add to our analysis. Like that's not a little thing to, I think, spotlight for people, because otherwise, yeah, people are going to be coming on and they're going to be like, how did you guys miss this? And I think it's important for people to understand what those data limitations are.
But what are we saying that the limitation is? That when somebody goes to the ED, that there's not a report that somebody has diabetes? I mean, that doesn't seem possible to me. Like, if we're getting reports about asthma and COPD, and how could it be that diabetes could not be reported at that point? Not that they're not getting treated, like, that doesn't seem reasonable.
So no, you're right. And this is Neil. And I certainly, my intent is not to put off. I think we had talked through this with Amanda and Alex previously. So that was a piece of the puzzle. I think the other pieces is that, historically, a lot of the data that we've shown has been at the county level, and it's only, I think, more recently that we've been trying to get data at the sub-county level to be able to display it as we've provided it here. The asthma and the COPD were data sets that were aligned with content working, or the climate justice working group discussions, as were premature death and low birth weight. We've not, diabetes is not one of those that we had looked at already. So I think it was a combination of those things. That's not to say that it's not available in the same way as the other health outcomes would be. And, I'm happy to continue the discussion about the diabetes indicator and look into it. At this point, it's not something that's ready, or, that we have and we just decided not to put in. We don't have that at a kind of a granular level like the other data sets are at this point.
So Neil, I just have a question. I mean, what is there ED and hospitalization data available at the census tract level? Just trying to understand, is that something, that could be added in the near term, or would that have to come after the public comment period, regardless of whether we put it on the list now?
It would take a bit of time because we would have to, access those particular records. There'd be a geocoding. We have to assign them to the census tracts. Just make sure that everything looks all right, and then kind of package it up to provide to you guys. So
Okay.
Similar to the other data sets, it would be a little bit of time to produce.
Okay. So this slide shows, that kind of initial language for what criteria could be. One idea.
And I think the other thing I want to add for, which, I think we had mentioned with the indicators that have been provided so far, there are sufficient numbers across the state. And I we'd have to look at how much data, where we didn't have enough data to protect confidentiality, and how that would impact, development of this data layer for addition to the criteria as well. So that would be part of the consideration too.
I like what Amanda's adding in here, and insofar as is really kind of capturing the fact that this doesn't have everything that we want it to, and in particular that there are some things that we're still working on getting available to us at certain points. How does this feel to everyone? Okay, I'm going to move us along, mostly because I know we're running kind of late in the game as far as reviewing everything else. So let's continue and see where we're landing as we kind of move through 2, 3, 4, 5. Amanda, you want to keep going?
Sure. All right, so this next section talks about how census tracts are scored really relatively to each other. So for each indicator, we take the percentile rank of it. So looking at a relative index from 0 to 100. So really how they line up versus each other rather than looking at, a critical pollution threshold or a critical, number of people with COPD that might make it vulnerable. So, just using that relative scoring approach. And then as I talked through a little bit before, multiple steps to work from the ground up, work from those individual indicators up to the factor scores and then the component scores. And the third step is multiplying those component scores by each other. So multiplying the environmental and climate score by the population health score to get the overall score. And this is done, as I'll describe, under, this idea that population and health characteristics kind of amplify, magnify, modify the potential negative effects of environmental burdens and climate change risks. That said, as we said before, consideration there is they are kind of given equal weight in the process. So this process results in an overall score for each census tract, and that overall score can be used to determine where each tract falls relative to all the tracts in the state or regionally. And as we'll discuss soon, we not only considered where a tract fell on the score statewide, but also within New York City and within all areas outside of New York City, which we're calling the rest of the state, so that communities outside of New York City were kind of considered differently as well. So slide 21 kind of talked about as we went through the indicators, this idea that everything kind of rolls up to the factor scores. Then the factor scores are weighted and added before multiplying things together. We also talked about the idea that within environmental burdens and climate change risks, the climate risks are given a double weight within the component to really equalize their combined influence relative to in the environmental factors, pollution exposures and land use, given that those were both kind of separate pillars of the legislation. Any questions or comments here?
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, sorry. So if a score on one side or the other is very high, but the other side is lower, that influences whether or not it is determined that it's a DAC.
Correct. Mm-hmm.
And we think that makes sense.
For two reasons.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Alex.
Well, there's two reasons for this, and one is like we went back and forth on how to do this, but one is guided by the legislation, the idea of kind of this compounded effect that they exacerbate one another is the multiplicative effect, which is why we did it that way. It's also what is kind of the prevailing thought as we go, as California and others have done. But yeah, I think that's really the main reason coming through that is being guided by the legislation. It's something that we did tinker with quite a bit to try to figure out, again, going back to kind of what Abby had mentioned, fitting with what we looked at as far as the ground truthing that you all did, how people felt about where the census tracts were DAX versus not. And the ground truthing really leaned almost entirely to the population characteristics and the health vulnerabilities. And so if we eliminated the environmental burdens, then it actually aligned more closely with the ground truthing that you all did, but it did not align with the legislative criteria and recommend or what we have to do based on the law. Man.
There's always so many options here. I mean, one idea, a middle ground between just excluding the left side of this is to kind of automatically include communities in the very top scoring areas on population characteristics and health vulnerabilities. And then for some subset with slightly lower population characteristics and health vulnerability score, compare, look at both elements. And I think we did try that as well, but I think there was kind of a, simplicity, consideration here as well for making
One
this.
One of the things I think is really important, that simplicity, that kind of like not creating a system that is containing as much as possible and getting like us 90% there, versus trying to make it feel like these things are getting cherry picked in various ways, like we're trying to manipulate the data. And so that was the balance that we really held, trying to do this all. And I think about 5 months ago, we kind of pulled in this whole, well, if we did this, and then on top of that, we just did the population characteristics. And as we were explaining it to you all, I think it became very clear that we were trying to build something that was too much, trying to make things fit, our perspective, as opposed to letting the data, in so much as what we can inform and how we put it together, letting the data actually create the process. Hope that helps, Amy.
Can I ask a follow-up question? Unless, Amy, did you want to say something?
No, it does help. I think it creates these situations like the one Amanda pointed out. I think there are, I'm looking in our region, there are similar, tracks where the population characteristics, health vulnerabilities are in the high 90s. But, the environmental burdens are, I guess not high enough to weight it into the DAC category. And yeah, so.
I do want to add before you go, this is the main reason, this discussion that we had several months ago is the main reason why individual criteria came up as a way to address this, because there was no other way that we come up with without like really feeling cherry picky about how we do this concoction or this formula right here. And so individual criteria came up as an approach to address this and deal with it while still staying true to the legislation, which is really trying to show the compound effects of the environmental burdens with the population characteristics and health vulnerabilities.
So Alex, my question, and I don't know if this is I don't know how answerable this is. So I get the idea of the compounding effects. But what would it mean for our maps or for whatever if we just added them together? Like, I mean, I guess what I'm curious, like how dramatically would that change the maps? And I mean, but I think the other piece of this is what I hear you saying is it maybe would better capture those ones that are currently getting left out.
Más o menos, yeah. Amanda and I tinkered with this, right? Well, we were like, well, why can't we just add them? And I don't think it changes that much. If I remember correctly, Amanda, I'm speaking off the cuff.
It doesn't change the overall that much. It'll definitely change specific communities. I mean, the Rochester case, you have the 90th percentile in one and the 6th percentile in another, that combined score of 96 still might not get you over something. So I think, but there's other things like right now, basically things are added equally because legislation didn't really, give any guidance or a way to kind of weight things unequally. Though, it's really up to you to decide that. I think if you do want to say, we do want to consider population characteristics and health vulnerabilities more and really make sure, because we did have the discussion, the big question was, should we include, communities with the highest population characteristics and health vulnerabilities, regardless of their environmental burdens and climate change risks? You could potentially have the way I think to do that and still meet the legislation would be a two-step screening, where you automatically include the areas with the highest population characteristics and health vulnerabilities. And then for some subset that are kind of moderate high, then you do a multiplicative or additive scoring approach. That's the way to kind of automatically include those top communities. But then we also had the individual criteria enter the picture of another way to serve those individuals who are in those communities that are being missed. I think this is so hard. I would love to spend, another 6 months doing this and all this sensitivity analysis again as things change, and put this in front of you again. So really torn between, that is also, there's many good options here. Well, good and also all imperfect. Where do we kind of stop playing around and get something out to public comment, thinking that public comment, totally new ideas might come into the fold and totally new indicators as well.
Yeah. This is still like in draft form, right? We got to put something out there. I also think that perfectly imperfect is still very much a reality here because of the fact that A, we're missing some critical indicators that we want to get in there, and B, that this approach we need to test. And so one of the things that we've strongly, talked about is this coming back together. And the reality is that you're going to be more than just meeting once annually to assess this and to look at it again and open it up and make changes. We need to track this. We need to make sure that the spending is going in the right place, and we also need to make sure that the actual, that the actual definitions are still aligning, and that they're real. So, or that they're on the ground, getting what we need to get them based on the legislation. So I want us to move down. I think, Amanda, if you go straight down to 23, with the understanding that we're talking about the geographic one, but we still need to talk about the individual criteria as well, which was meant to address some of these very issues that we just talked about.
Okay, so this just captures the idea that once you have these overall scores, a community can be included based on where it falls statewide, as well as where it falls either within New York City or the rest of the state. Because really what happened is, so many New York City communities are included high in the overall scoring system. They're going to be included through the statewide score and the New York City score. It's really this idea of allowing communities outside of New York City to kind of be on their own scores, so that so we capture more of them that might be disadvantaged, and kind of, there's so many data limitations, and it's hard to say whether the data is itself just, the virtue of the indicators we have is skewed toward one or the other. So that's that. Let's move on to the next one. Which kind of describes.
I think we can kind of skip this. I know that we've talked through it, but this is the idea here that we're using percentile ranks, that multi-step scoring to capture regional differences, and the multiplicative approach. And I think the comments that I've heard here is that we want to assess that multiplicative approach versus additional adding as opposed to multiplying in the coming time as we review things. And that we need to, we need to look through that and assess whether it's the best way forward next year.
Okay, I'm just writing some notes. Can everyone see these notes? Anything to add to these comments?
No, but I'm going to bring up Eddie's comment, which I think is a valid one. Like, we're going through all the details here because we think transparency is really important, but we're edging up to the place where I think Sonal and Rawa will have to leave soon. So I wanted to get you guys a sense on, like, we can zoom through this stuff and try to get to a vote faster, or is this something that you would like us to talk through in more detail as we go? Abby thinks we should vote. Okay, we're going to do this quickly then. I want to go through with clarity some of these things, but I'm going to just do it fast. Okay, so Alana, if you can move on to slide 25. We discussed this where the designation will be 35% of the tracks. There's reasonings for that, but we can move forward for that. Now on to slide 28. Okay, this is the multi-step approach that we go. Actually, let's just move down to 4 because I feel like we have covered this in detail already. If anyone has any questions. Okay, let's move down to slide.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Just
Go ahead, Eddie.
one quick one. I think some of us, I don't know if this is the slide that corresponds with it, but in the earlier slides where we kind of talked about some of these discussion points at a high level, one of the bullets talked about something like 3% of a community, if it's found to be an indigenous community, would be included. Is this that section of the okay? The reason I'm saying this is I think that when I saw that written out, it's the first time I've seen it written out in just that way. And it's a little troubling because we have been literally for months now talking about how a tribal, like how are indigenous communities going to be captured here. What we were told repeatedly was that there was a separate process where the state of New York was going to be engaging indigenous leaders directly. So none of us, I don't think I've heard any more about that since the summertime. And I'm afraid that this doesn't get anywhere near what we were hoping we would get in terms of commitments to our indigenous family in New York. So I just want to make sure that, is this additive in addition to whatever the state is going to be doing, engaging directly with indigenous leaders? Because 3%, this does not capture what we always thought was a serious intention to somehow reflect the needs of our indigenous families. So can someone just speak to, this should not be the only and final word when it comes to disadvantaged communities, the role of the state and the sovereign role that indigenous leaders play and territories play in New York State.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Eddie. So DEC, does one of you want to take the answer about kind of how that engagement is going?
Sure, I can speak to that. I don't believe David Witt is on as a panelist. I believe he's as an attendee, but we have reached out to our nations, and we allow them, because it is a consultation process, they determine the extent to which they would like to be involved, and we've not really heard from them on that. So we will definitely, if they decide that they would like to be involved in the process and be involved more fully as a disadvantaged community, then we can absolutely allow for that. But we have a process that we have to go through, and we have to, they have to make that determination, not us. We have included their lands, but as to the extent to which they'll be involved, they make that determination. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I had a follow-up recommendation, but Ra was in the chat, so please circle back to me after she's.
I don't want to take up too much time, but there definitely is some miscommunication happening. We have heard, some of us from the Haudenosaunee Task Force, members of that task force, and I think that they would like to come and do a presentation, and David Whitty and others can also, obviously DEC can be there as well, but they would like to directly communicate with the Climate Justice Working Group. And I don't know who makes a decision to do that or what have you, or if it's possible, but I think it would be really great for this body to hear directly from them, just because we're getting a lot of information that does not align with, I think, the presentation that David Whitty made, and now what Alana's adding as far as communication. They're saying that they feel like they're not getting sufficient communication. So it's a weird, strange place to be as a Climate Justice Working Group member, but I think it would be critical to hear directly from Indigenous communities, in particular the Haudenosaunee Climate Task Force.
Absolutely, we have no problems here from them, but I can only speak to the process, and I can only speak to what we've been told as DEC. I don't know if Dave is on, but like I said, Dave, yes, Dave, you're there.
Sorry, no, you there?
Yes, we can hear you.
Sorry, I am here. I just have it on my other monitor, so things are a little wonky. I'm going to be looking off to the side. You pretty much hit it on the head. We did reach out to the nations and ask for consultation. We did not hear back from the nation leadership regarding any specific, requests to continue discussions beyond the initial information we presented to them a few times at the annual meetings with the nation's leadership. If HATF wants to discuss that with us, we would be happy to work with them. I'm not sure if the working group is aware of the relationship between HATF and the nation's leaderships, but HATF is a body that's been developed by the Haudenosaunee leaders and the Grand Council to work on behalf of the Haudenosaunee nations when it comes to environmental issues. So they would, they're more than welcome to reach out to us. We did reach out to them as part of that initial outreach during the annual meetings, but we haven't heard anything specific. And I think that if the working group wants to meet with the HATF, then that's it's fine with me. And I can help set that up. If they want to speak to the working group, then we can set up one of those calls.
So in the meantime, I think working to set up that call, I think will be very important. For this, I think making a note of continuous engagement, and then also engagement with Climate Working Group, is pretty important to make sure that we are engaging as intended. Does that sound appropriate, Eddie, to your?
Yeah, no, we're clearly not going to get a meeting of the HTF in the next 8 minutes. So what I would strongly recommend is that wherever we could see this, that a note be made that the Climate Justice Working Group has for most of 21 been asking about how this applies to Indigenous communities, and that we've been told that the state will engage directly with the nations. And we eagerly await the outcome of that engagement. I just don't want anyone to be second guessing the intention of at least the citizen members of this working group, that we have been pressing for this for many months now. Because I can easily see at a public forum somebody attacking like the citizen members of this group, even though we've been the ones pressing on this literally for months. So we just need to,
Totally.
for that to be seen somewhere, that the state has said this is our responsibility to engage directly with the nations, even though we've been asking about this. Like if we could say that somewhere publicly where it's clearly visible to folks, I think that would take care of it, at least for now. But yeah, I agree with everything Raul was saying.
Okay, good. We will make note of that. Let's go down, Alana, to slide 40. Let me check. 35. Okay, individual household criteria. Now going down to slide 37. And I apologize for going so quickly. What we had discussed before and what I'd like to make sure that everyone is feeling okay with is to include low-income customers in New York State if they meet the criteria of at or below 60% state median income. And to kind of the documentation and screening, the SNAP, SSI, and temporary assistance all kind of work through that low-income threshold. And so if that is a way for them to check. So this is the blue text on the right. Slide 39 now.
Question,
Oh, yes.
Alex, yes, and can we do a yes and on this one? I feel like it was kind of in the guardrails where we start with the sort of low income definition that we all said is where we should start, but that we would like to get to actually that moderate income one at some point, especially in consideration for the inequity, the income inequities that exist in 5 boroughs of New York City.
Yeah, I think that that's definitely what we had conversed about before, with the idea of maybe embiggening, like use my 6-year-old's language, of creating the larger piece of the pie for funding, as opposed to trying to kind of diminish the amount of funding of that, say, 35% total. So that's reflecting what we talked about last week, is what I'm saying.
Thank you.
Slide 39, please. What this results in is really a coverage underneath the disadvantage criteria to 49%, as we're using this más o menos 49%, maybe 50%, if we're using the 60% state median income. Okay, and the last one, coming down to slide, we're going to go to 6. Sorry, not slide 6, number 6. So let me see. Annual review. And that is slide 43. I want to be clear about this. This is already in the CLCPA language to have an annual review. And so it's not that we're going to add any specific things other than just like mirroring this language and acknowledging that, dude, we got to keep meeting and we have to continuously improve this thing, because perfectly imperfect is not perfect enough for all of us. Okay. That was the world's rushed review of things. And I am sorry, but I actually also really appreciate that we have had this discussion, because, you know, when you're about to vote, you start looking at things in detail and questioning, and that's good. It's as it should be. So let's get down to it then now. If we have talked through all this, I'm going to let Alana do the voting thing.
Okay. Oh, can everyone hear me? Everyone hear me? Okay, so we're, yes, all right. So we're going to, sorry, let's skip ahead to this. We did the temperature check. Sorry, I don't want to skip too far ahead. So we're going to go to the actual vote, and I'm going to start with Rawa and Zonal, since I know that they have to go. So we'll start with Zonal.
Alana, I think you want to be on slide 48.
Am I on the right? No, did I skip it?
49.
49?
49.
Okay,
Yeah.
49. There we go. So what we are voting on are the, like I said, the indicators, the inclusion of the indicators, the census tract scores, 35%, basically everything 1 through 5. So Rawa, I will start with you about how you're feeling about and what your vote is on the areas 1 through 5. And we can discuss further on 6.
I'm going to vote yes.
Okay. And Sono?
I also vote yes.
Right, and then we'll go back to from where I can see on my list of participants, we will go to Abby.
I'm also a yes.
And Amy
I vote yes.
and Jonathan.
I vote yes.
Eddie?
I cast an imperfectly perfect vote for yes.
I expect nothing less from you, Eddie. Elizabeth
I vote yes.
and Jill
I vote yes.
and Mary Beth.
My vote is yes.
Okay, and we'll go to our state representatives. Chris.
I'll vote yes.
Joe?
I vote yes as well.
Neil?
I vote yes.
And that leaves me with also a yes. Oh, I could have thrown it in there. I should have maybe made it a little bit more dramatic and had a nice pause there, but we're already at 2:59. So we have a unanimous vote of yes, understanding that this is a draft and it is perfectly imperfect, and that we will absolutely revisit this and we will look to improve it with public comment. We will look to improve it even after we have a vote on the final criteria. This is again final with a small, F, because we will go through this year after year to discuss it and to make sure that it is where we need it to be. So I'm happy that we've got it so that we can send this out to public comment and everyone will get an opportunity to have their say on what this looks like and give us an opportunity ourselves to maybe do some additional ground truthing and have folks reach out to us directly and ask questions and give us some additional suggestions. So good to know. Oh, Rawa, you have a quick question?
I did have a quick question. You indicated at the beginning of the meeting, Alana, that we would be doing kind of notes in real time. Do we think that we should include something in number 3 for this sort of ongoing Indigenous or tribal leadership conversation?
Absolutely. We can definitely add that. We, will continue to reach out to leadership. I don't want to harass them, but I definitely want to make sure that they know that there is an opportunity to participate. And if they want to, the Haudenosaunee Task Force wants to do a presentation, we want to have them do that and be involved to the extent that they're comfortable.
Thank you guys so much. I appreciate so much of your comments and thoughtful, like pushing us to make this as perfectly imperfect as it is, and we will continue to make it better.
Now, with regards to 6, which we're not actually voting on, but with regards to 6, we don't even need to necessarily discuss this right now, but it's definitely something I want to put in everyone's head. And I kind of made a reference to it last time. We understand that this is going to be, the legislation calls for us to come together and review this information annually. I know that would be an awful lot of information for everyone to kind of have thrown at them in one meeting every single year, and would potentially be one of those nice full day meetings that no one really wants to have here at central office at DEC. So I will put it in everyone's head and you can think about it. You don't need to answer now, but to start off, just maybe for the first year or two, meeting quarterly. So only about maybe 4 times a year, just so we make sure that everybody's being kept up on things. We're getting information a little bit more regularly. We're able to look at information, get information to us. And so that it doesn't feel like everyone's having a whole big giant pile of information and documentation and numbers thrown at them once a year. So just, again, you don't need to respond now, just something to think about. And we can talk about it again in, we'll say June. We'll bring it up again in June. Something else I wanted to bring up is that we will be looking in 2022 to re-engage with the Climate Action Council on the scoping plan. So I'll be sending around, we'll be having some conversations first with the Climate Action Council leadership, and then I'll be sending around some polling just to see when everybody wants to get together, to talk, and then when everyone's schedules are a little bit more open. I know that for a good group of people, this is the legislative session is starting. So you have your legislative agendas, you have your other, responsibilities. And I will probably be looking to reach out to some of you for items that are not related to Climate Justice Working Group. So I know that we all will have a lot that we're looking to do, but just so we're looking forward into January. And, I know that we're very excited that we got through this and, but we're not done. So we will continue to move forward. Does anybody have anything else they want to throw in or any suggestions? Like I said, you don't have to comment on the 4 meetings right now. That's just something I wanted to bring up.
Hey, Alana, this is Chris. Just maybe really quick, did we talk about, having a regroup to talk about what the public input process looks like?
Yes. So the public input process, sorry, I know that there was a slide on that. It's a little bit. See,
well,
and
I'm just wondering if the group might benefit from just, setting up another discussion just to kind of talk through that.
Sure. And that's probably going, like I said, we're going to look to do that in 2022. I don't want to force everybody to try to come back before the holidays or directly after the holidays. That's not who I am. So I will try to pull you back after the new year, and with the goal of talking about the public comment process and how we're looking forward, and to see what extent everybody wants to be involved, at least in the public information process. We will be looking, before we hold the 6 hearings or 6 or more hearings, to have at least 1 or 2 public information sessions, like I said, in order to get folks familiar, reintroduce some of the information, maybe so we have people who can actually see it all sort of presented at once in a different format, in more of a, educational presentation format, before we move on to the public hearings, which we hope to have started or get started with those in February.
Hey, Alana?
Yes.
Quick request. I don't know if this was something that was raised early in the call, but I know I would, like Nidra would appreciate, if possible, if someone from and I don't know if this runs afoul of any sort of kind of procedural thing, but I know I would appreciate being able to communicate to the people that read our e-blast and our members what it is that we've done today. Would you all be comfortable crafting something, basically that kind of outlines, even if it's in an abbreviated form, some of what the climate justice work group decided today? So that we can let people know, hey, hearings will be up. Like, we want to be able to start letting people know decisions were made that gets us to the next phase of things. And I wouldn't want to I would feel better if I'm just cutting and pasting something that we all agree with, or not that we all agree with, something that reflects our collective sense of what we did today, rather than me butchering something that I'll get an email or a call about later,
Absolutely. We have been documenting this entire process. So we definitely have something that we can put out that you can, we'll make it into a more easily. We have a memo that kind of has, basically explain the entire process sort of from start to finish. We obviously won't make you put that entire thing out. That's going to be available on our website. So what we're going to do is make something that's maybe a little bit shorter that can, that's accessible for the public that you can all share with everybody. And we can also we'll maybe put it on the website, the Climate New York website with the PowerPoint and this meeting, just so everybody can point to it. We'll make sure that you guys have it so you can steer your members towards it as well. And, give everybody an idea. I don't want to, tell everybody when these public meetings are going to be before I have conversations with our, team in communication services. But the goal is to start the process in February. And I'm just being reminded by our council that we did not approve the minutes, so that I kind of stepped over that.
Well, before we move on to that, and I wasn't suggesting, and I didn't mean to, if that's what was interpreted, I wasn't suggesting that we would, in our communications to our respective bases, lay out when the actual hearings will be, just that the hearings will be forthcoming. But just for my purposes, literally all I need is a paragraph with a link to the larger memo or whatever else if folks want to do a deeper dive. But literally like just a paragraph just to kind of like let our people know what we did today. And if you want to know more, here's a deep dive link. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I just want to add that for those of us who are part of the climate justice leadership, it's really important that the concerns that we raise not get lost in the complexity of all of this, and that people from our communities know that the concerns that are important to them, that were lifted within this body. So yeah, I would just say that.
Absolutely, we're definitely keeping track.
And so a one paragraph thing with a link is something that you guys conceivably think you might be able to get to us within this week. I'm just hoping to be able to put something out before before Christmas. That is all. Yeah.
I think we can definitely take the documentation that we've had and kind of boil it down into a paragraph. And the goal will be to make sure that and have that sort of together with the presentation and the minutes, have that all go up, hopefully by the end of this week. We always try to make sure that we get all of that made available to the public as soon as possible. So we will definitely be working that pretty much the minute we stop talking here, we'll start doing that. And speaking of documentation, definitely want to make sure that we approve all the minutes that we did not approve while we were so I believe it was from May until recent. So I definitely want to make sure that those are made public. So if we could, let's see, you're right, Eddie, that's an excellent question. Do we have a quorum available for minutes? Let me do a quick count.
I hope not, because I'd like to read them.
Actually, along with that, Alana, back in November, I think you'd asked us about this. I read most of the meeting minutes then, but some of them weren't in the SharePoint yet. So some of them, I've read some of them and we feel comfortable on some of them, but some of them not. And there was one meeting in particular where the amount of detail in the notes was very, very minimal, to the point that it was like, I don't know if it makes sense to vote on these particular minutes. And that, just to flag it, is June 15th. And as I look at my notes back here from when I did review them, just to kind of reinforce a theme from today, on June 23rd, the issue of engaging with the Haudenosaunee Environmental Task Force came up. And so, yes, that is indeed something that we've been talking about for a while. So it'd be great to.
Well, if we're not comfortable with that, we can wait and we can have a meeting in January. We did want to regroup in January, so I can send something around. We can regroup in January and we can approve the minutes then if you want some more time to read. And in the meantime, you said that June 15th was one that stuck out. So let me go back and look at those and see why those are lacking.
Yeah, and way back when, August 12th and September 29th were missing from the SharePoint drive. I don't know if they still are or not. But yeah, those minutes were not there at one point. Maybe if they are still missing, if they could be added, that would be fantastic.
I will make sure that everything is in the SharePoint. I apologize for anything that was missing or anything that was lacking. I will make sure that that is there, and I will see what happened with the June 10th notes. So we'll just agree that we'll wait and we will look at those again in January. Okay. Is there anything else that we need to cover? Yes, Eddie, this would be the last climate justice working group meeting for 2021.
Who's
We get to start
celebrating that,
all
Eddie?
over again in 2022. Unless you really, really want to meet right before the new year. I mean, we could throw something together in that last week of the month. I mean, you want to meet on the 27th? My schedule's looking pretty clear.
The resignation emails are starting to fly. Don't do it a lot.
Okay. Well, if we've covered everything, we can call it for 2021. And thank you so much, everyone, for all the work and all the hours, like literally all the hours you've put in with us and getting this very important work done, knowing that I'd say we're halfway, but we're not halfway because this is, and not to say negatively, a never ending process. I actually think of it as a never ending process in a positive way because we can, look at this again. We can make changes. We can make adjustments. We can try to be flexible and make sure that we are, I see that, Eddie. Oh yeah, we're going to beat CSC. We're going to beat Climate Action Council. They're not even going to be done until what, like 2023, 24? We're definitely going to be way ahead of them. I'm not even worried about that. I mean, I don't think they knew this was a contest, but it is. So again, thank you everybody for your amazing work, for your amazing insight. I've learned a tremendous amount and I look forward to learning even more in 2022. Happy holidays to everyone. Definitely going to send stuff around to everybody and absolutely going to be sending around another doodle poll before the end of the year. So even though we are giving you a break until 2022, you're still gonna have to look at your calendars to see when you're available so we can chat and discuss some of these other issues and maybe approve the minutes. And I will definitely check on and make sure that everything that's supposed to be in the SharePoint is in the SharePoint, and we'll get that summary paragraph and all of the information up with the goal of trying to get everything, the maps and everything available for the public as soon as possible so we can start the public participation process. And an extra special thanks to our amazing consultants at Loom who have done a phenomenal job, who have fielded so many of my emails and questions and have definitely helped me through a lot of this process that I, was not super familiar with. So I've learned a lot about this sort of analysis that I did not know. I'll not be speaking to it as an expert because I didn't learn it like that, but I can definitely, speak a little bit more on it than I could before. So with all that said, and to the attendees, the people who have stuck with us listening throughout this entire process, thanks for sticking with us. I have been capturing the questions that you've put in the Q&A, and we will, so we have been paying attention and we have been listening to your questions. And yes, Rosa, who is not on here, even though she could be like low-key watching us, through from Seattle, but absolutely to Rosa Mendez, who did an amazing job beginning this. I just carried it, man. I just carried that torch like the last couple of feet. She really was carrying it the whole way. She is definitely very, very much missed. She's the reason for a lot of my stress because she did leave me, and and now I'm in charge. But I'll definitely send her a message and let her know that we kind of that we finished this one part and that she was a huge, massive part of it, and she's definitely missed, and that we will definitely let her know when we've done the final vote. All right, I think I'm done pontificating. Is anybody? I'm done listening to myself speak. All right, thanks everyone. Have a nice holiday, and we will definitely see everybody in 2022. Congratulations, you've done an amazing job.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.